Sylvie Moreau could measure her life in the delays she left behind. Missed trains, belated birthdays, and art shows that opened precisely 5 minutes before she arrived, breathless and apologetic. The Parisians who rode the Line 6 had taken to calling her La Pentresse Fantôme because no one ever saw her at work. They only discovered the phosphorescent murals that bloomed overnight on station walls and tunnel mouths. Neon skylines, floating bicycles, moons carved into gears. By the time commuters blinked at her latest vision, Sylvie was already clattering up stairwells in search of coffee, cursing her hopeless sense of time. She told herself the lateness was genetic. Her father had been a jazz pianist who believed that downbeats ought to wobble. Yet there was something else, something she could never confess. When Sylvie painted, the line between imagination and reality blurred. Each mural that slid from her wrist showed places and moments that did not yet exist. 24 hours later, the scene slipped from pigment into the streets above, as though Paris were obeying her unconscious blueprints. After she sprayed a luminous archway strung with holographic banners, an identical arch rose beside the Seine the next afternoon, city officials insisting it had always been on the construction docket. When she rendered autonomous bakery drones delivering croissants, fleets of silver spheres buzzed out of boulangeries the following dawn, confusing bakers and delighting tourists. For months, Sylvie tried to ignore the correlation, but the city's rapid metamorphosis cornered her. She could not paint the future without watching it bloom behind her like spilled paint water. And so she developed rituals of caution. No murals after wine, no overt catastrophes, no mention of her mother's failing health. Still, the visions demanded technicolor life, and Sylvie remained a slave to them, perpetually late, perpetually guilty. One raw January evening, she descended into the half-lit corridor between Montparnasse Bienvenue and Edgar Quinet stations. Ice crystals fogged the fluorescent bulbs, and the rumble of trains echoed like distant surf. She intended a small piece, just a pair of mechanical swans gliding over a midnight river, but her fingers itched for something grander. She sketched a clock tower first, oxidized brass vertebra, a dozen interlocking faces turning on invisible axes. Around it, she scattered thousands of translucent pocket watches that spun like planets inside an observatory dome. In the center, she painted a lone figure, someone not herself, guiding the swirling pieces with a slender screwdriver, knitting moments together with watchmaker's focus. When she stepped back, the air smelled of ozone and verbena, as it always did when a painting was hot. The design thrummed beneath the tunnel's echo, and the minute hands on her imagined watches quivered, inches away from motion. Sylvie felt the tingle of foreknowledge bloom along her scalp. Whatever she had conjured tonight would haunt the morning streets. Could a single craftsman alter the mess she'd made? Could he puncture her cycle of lateness? Her phone buzzed. 2:07. She was naturally 1 hour and 7 minutes behind the schedule she'd promised herself. She packed her cans and fled, splashing through puddles of fractured light. Across the city, Antoine Delacour locked the glass doors of Temps Vietable, his watch shop near the Rue Saint-Honoré, exactly at 2:10 IEM. Though the hour was eccentric for retail, Antoine adhered to a private logic. He opened at 14:10 and closed 12 hours later, the inverse of standard time, because it pleased him to honor symmetry. Regular patrons forgave the oddity, grateful that the city's finest horloger could repair a 1914 Patek or replicate a minute repeater spring smaller than a hair. Antoine's punctuality was legend. He claimed to have arrived at his own birth on the precise stroke predicted by his mother's obstetrician. Yet lately, even his atomic synced walls could not explain the tremors in the timeline. Trains appeared 2 minutes early, fog banks lingered past schedule, and stars seemed to wink their coordinates forward or back when sketched against roof lines. Customers brought pocket watches, complaining of impossible gains. 10 seconds ahead per day, they protested. Antoine opened the cases and found microscopic crystals, not of dust, but of something like stardust, wedged between gear teeth as though time itself were shedding. He suspected environmental factors until, 3 mornings earlier, he stumbled upon an archway on the Seine glowing with hidden circuits. An archway he could swear materialized overnight. Perhaps, he thought, someone was hacking the fabric of chronology. Antoine kept such musings to himself. Watchmakers lived by precision, not daydreams. After locking up, he wound his grandmother's silver fob, noting the sweep of its seconds hand, smooth, obedient. Then he glimpsed a flyer stuck beneath the blue doorframe. It featured a phosphorescent skyline streaked with graffiti initials, SM. Underneath, a teasing line read, "Don't be late to tomorrow." Antoine frowned. The flyer's cityscape bore uncanny resemblance to structural revisions he had observed lately. Was this artist the source? He pocketed the flyer, set his course home, and never deviated from routine until a train delay at Edgar Quinet rerouted him through an unlit service corridor. There, his flashlight beam discovered a fresh mural. A towering clockwork cosmos, every brushstroke alive with kinetic promise. And at its heart, a figure bearing his own profile down to the striped bow tie he wore that night stood poised to tighten a jeweled screw. Antoine's lungs forgot air. A vandal he'd never met had painted him years ago at most, into the marrow of time. Footsteps skittered somewhere in the dark. Antoine snapped off his light, heart hammering in triple time. When the noises faded, he fetched a loupe from his vest and leaned toward the nearest watch face in the mural. The hand-painted numbers were indistinguishable from those on an authentic Breguet he'd serviced that afternoon. Whoever the phantom was, she knew more than pigments. She understood horology's secret language. Jaw set, Antoine photographed the graffiti, time-stamped each shot, and resolved to find SM before sunrise. Morning carried the bitter rattle of sleet against windows. Sylvie overslept, an epic failure even by her standards, and awoke at noon to news feeds screaming about chronostorms. Traffic lights across arrondissement flickered between red and green in fractions of seconds, confusing drivers. Café clocks diverged by minutes despite sharing electrical grids. In a dizzy montage, reporters stood beneath the new brass tower, her tower now erupting from the Tuileries like a mechanical beanstalk, its dials spinning at variance from one another. Sylvie chewed her thumbnail until blood tinged her tongue. She had painted possibility and instead sown confusion. Usually the city acclimated, integrating her visions as though bureaucrats had always planned them. Today, however, time itself was rebelling, unwilling to stitch the canvas clean. She pulled on boots, praying she could erase or repaint before Paris cracked in half. The moment she opened her door, a man blocked the threshold. He wore a charcoal coat dusted with sleet, a watchmaker's loupe protruding from one breast pocket, and the flyer she'd printed dangling between gloved fingers. "Mademoiselle SM?" he asked in flawless, infuriatingly calm French. Reacting like the cornered ghost people imagined her to be, Sylvie tried to slam the door. The man wedged a polished shoe against it. "I'm Antoine Delacour, maestro-lodger, certified by Musée d'Horlogerie. You painted me last night. We need to discuss the consequences." Sylvie's gaze darted to the corridor. No neighbors in sight. If he was police, he was stylishly undercover. "You have the wrong girl. My initials are S.A." She lied, though the overspray staining her cuticles contradicted her. Antoine produced his phone, displaying the mural's photograph, zoomed onto her signature swirl. He followed pigment trails from Edgar Quinet titanium white, molybdenum blue, and a custom rose gold aerosol, sold only at Leclerc Beaux-Arts. "The clerk remembered you. I have receipts." "Spying and shopping receipts? Lovely hobbies," she snapped. "I prefer the term time forensics." "May I come in?" Sylvie weighed possibilities. The city outside was glitching because of her. And here stood a man literally painted into the solution by whatever subconscious compass guided her hand. Perhaps the universe had delivered him like a perfectly wound mainspring. She stepped aside. Inside her loft, canvases leaned like dominoes, and half-empty spray cans littered the parquet. Antoine scanned the controlled chaos with clinical precision before focusing on the window view beyond the rooftops. The brass clock tower she'd birthed last night now dwarfed Notre Dame's spire. One dial raced ahead, another crawled backward. "I'm sorry," she murmured. "I paint things, and then they come true. Not always, but lately with frightening accuracy." Antoine removed his coat, revealing a vest of spring green brocade embroidered with minute Roman numerals. "Time manifests in unpredictable manners. But your latest creation destabilized synchronization mechanisms across Paris. Mechanical, digital, even biological," Sylvie echoed. "My heart, for example," he touched his chest lightly. "It's beating as if arguing with a metronome." The line might have sounded poetic, yet his brow furrowed with real distress. Sylvie's guilt deepened. "Tell me how to unpaint a future." He walked to her drafting table, unrolled blueprints of prior murals, and aligned them with his own notepad where he recorded temporal anomalies. "I think your visions are predictive, not prescriptive, except when you depict mechanisms, particularly clocks. Then they impose their cadence on local reality, overriding existing harmonies. You're saying the universe trusts my aesthetic sense to redesign its timeline?" Her laugh cracked around the edges. "More logically, you tap a stream of quantum probabilities. Your paint collapses one path into inevitability. But because you're perpetually late, the execution lacks coordination. The resulting future clashes with established order." Sylvie sank onto a stool. "So if I'd been punctual, the city could adapt?" "Possibly. But let's test." He removed a slender toolkit from his pocket. Tweezers, a slotted screwdriver the width of a pin, and an antique watch face with no casing. "Create a small piece now under supervision. I'll calibrate its temporal effect." Sylvie grabbed a tin panel and, with trembling grout pen, etched a single image. A rose blooming inside an hourglass. As she drew, Antoine counted aloud, marking each stroke. Second 12, second 24, ensuring her gestures aligned with universal seconds. When she finished, he tapped the bare dial. Nothing happened. The loft remained still. "Give it 24 hours," Sylvie suggested, nerves jangling. "Or—" Antoine held the uncased dial beneath her drawing. A whisper of energy passed between metal and ink. The rose shimmered and unfolded one petal, spilling crimson dust onto the floorboards. 24 seconds, not hours." Sylvie's eyes widened. "Ugh, that's accelerated." "Because timing was intentional," Antoine said, satisfaction bubbling under his precise tone. "We can harness your gift safely, if we cooperate." Outside, sirens dopplered through crooked seconds. They had no time to waste. For the next 10 hours, Sylvie and Antoine worked as a duet. He charted a map of Paris, identifying critical chronographs, tower bells, train station clocks, rhythm-regulated traffic systems. Sylvie sketched corrective glyphs to drown the chaotic pulses. At Antoine's insistence, each design conformed to a strict schedule. She would commence on the stroke of 40 past the hour, pause on 47, resume on 52, finish by 0. The pattern, he claimed, resonated with the palindromic heartbeat of healthy temporal flow. Night draped the city in velvet when they descended into Châtelet's maintenance tunnel, ghosts among hiss and steel. Antoine held a lantern. Sylvie wielded her arsenal of color. She painted an interlaced lattice of hourglasses, each feeding sand up instead of down, reversing the false acceleration of earlier anomalies. Between them, she wrote, in tiny cursive, Pour Paris, avec pardon. As the final letter dried, a hush swept the tunnel. Far above, bells tolled midnight, every bell synchronized so precisely their vibrations braided into a single note. Sylvie's phone chimed on the dot. Commuters paused mid-stride, feeling the city breathe in unanimous tempo. Antoine checked his grandmother's fob, perfect agreement with network time. They exhaled together, two artisans balancing the scales their ancestors only dreamt to touch. Relief, like champagne bubbles, tickled Sylvie's spine. She collapsed on the tunnel's metal grating and laughed, a clear, full laugh that ricocheted down the line. Antoine sat beside her, removing his gloves. You met the deadline. Don't sound shocked, she teased, though tears slicked her lashes. I had the world's sternest metronome. He watched her a moment too long, then glanced away, as though reprimanding himself for deserting propriety. Our task may not be finished, the tower still stands. They returned topside to the Tuileries. The brass behemoth glimmered under moonlight, but its dials now ticked in harmony with the stars. Tourists snapped selfies, unaware it had ever threatened chaos. Still, Sylvie knew a monument born of accident had no rightful claim to soil. She raised a can, ready to repaint its sides into something gentler. Antoine laid a hand on hers. Leave it. Paris can use new marvels provided they behave. He smiled, a rare crack in his clockmaker's composure. Sylvie's heartbeat skipped a joyful, terrifying arrhythmia, and she wondered whether Antoine could hear it. Then maybe we co-author its maintenance schedule? His gaze softened. Only if we co-author breakfasts as well. I open at 14:10, but I can adjust. That would make you late, she pointed out, grinning. Punctuality is relative, Antoine said, offering his arm. With the right collaborator, they strolled along the Seine, passing vendor stalls whose clocks now agreed on 0:37. Above, drones delivered croissants as dawn's first lavender brushed rooftops. Another of Sylvie's inventions, now seamlessly ordinary. She marveled how swiftly the world accepted wonders when timed correctly. Montparnasse's elevated track loomed ahead, its pillars still bearing her earliest murals. Antoine traced one with thoughtful fingertips. Tell me something, Sylvie. Do you ever paint hearts? Her cheeks warmed, remembering the swarm of pocket watches swirling around the figure she had modeled after him. Only when I'm certain they won't break. That implies a future you can guarantee. Or co-guarantee, she said, raising an eyebrow. He removed the fob watch, snapped open the case, and set the tiny hands to 0:40. My grandmother taught me this symbol. Resetting to start is a promise to try. He held the watch toward her. Will you add your art to this? Sylvie pulled a silver paint pen from her satchel and sketched the tiniest gear on the inside cover, interlocking with the movement's own. The pen's tip released a solitary spark. The gear turned, invisible to anyone without a loop. She clicked the case shut and handed it back. Antoine pocketed it carefully, as though placing her heartbeat beside his own. We synchronize, then? We synchronize, she echoed. Weeks slid into patterned cadence. Under Antoine's tuition, Sylvie learned to budget seconds the way she once rationed aerosol. She still painted beneath the city. She could never sever that pulse. But each new mural was a collaboration. Antoine supplied blueprints for timekeeping devices. Sylvie adorned them with dream. Together they erected kinetic sculptures that steadied hospital ventilators, fountains that rose and fell on hour chimes to conserve water, and luminous constellations projected onto overcast nights so children could wish on reliable stars. Paris applauded, unaware its timeline had once teetered. They argued, of course, Sylvie craving spontaneity, Antoine lobbying for charts. But when disagreements threatened derailment, they paused, synchronized watches, and breathed until their pulses aligned. In those silences they discovered a third rhythm, neither hers nor his, but a duet's fluent hush. Slowly, her chronic lateness dissolved, not through scolding, but through the gravity of being met exactly where she stood. On an April morning, they found themselves atop the brass tower's mezzanine, calibrating an equinox mechanism Sylvie had rendered in shades of sunrise. Below, cherry blossoms trembled like pink clocks counting petals. Antoine tightened a final screw, dusted his head, and tilted his head. "Do you hear that?" "What?" She strained, catching only gulls and car horns. "No dissonance," he tapped the rail in gentle emphasis. "The world is on time." Sylvie rested her forehead against his shoulder. "Then we're unemployed." "Hardly." He retrieved his grandmother's fob now, containing her microgear and a sliver of rose quartz he'd inlaid beside it. The second's hand beat deliberately, confident. He slid the chain around her neck instead of his own. An heirloom belongs to the future, not the past. Sylvie's throat unlatched, a constellation of words, protests, gratitude, declarations, but none fit the minute. So she kissed him, anchoring the moment, not with syllables, but with the undeniable syncopation of two hearts realizing they shared a downbeat. A breeze circled the tower, riffling her hair. Somewhere, a can of spray paint rattled in her satchel, eager for the next canvas. The city kept breathing in precise meter, but within that steadiness was endless room for improvisation. Sylvie understood finally. Punctuality was not the enemy of art. It was the frame that held astonishment steady long enough to be savored. And love, true love, was simply the most elegant complication in any movement, binding gears that would otherwise drift apart. That night, as the first star spooled its light above the Champs-Élysées, people glimpsed new murals blooming in unexpected places, park benches curling into shape-shifting sculptures at exactly twilight, public gardens whose flowers opened when small hands clapped, river lamps that read lovers' pulses and pulsed back in reply. None disrupted the city's cadence, all enriched it. And somewhere beneath the quivering platforms of Line 6, an old signature S, M now interlaced with a second infinitesimal AD, glowed just bright enough to remind the dark that tomorrow, like every heartbeat, arrives exactly on time.